Guys, much like the bountiful meal that I was presented with during my Thanksgiving holiday, these right-wing losers, these snowflakes, are providing us with a seemingly infinite quantity of easy content to make fun of. And recently, a couple of these dorks, Matt Walsh and Stephen Crowdois, he's French, so that's how you say it, they're pissing their pants over a documentary that was released recently. And it was a documentary on the American Revolution by a guy named Kenneth Burns, okay, who I believe is the great-great-great-great-grandson of George Burns and is also related to Mr. Burns, interestingly enough. Now, no shade on Ken Burns. I honestly thought that guy was dead, okay? But apparently not. So I learned something other than the American Revolution happened. I was not aware of that until this documentary came out. But there's a central point that is made in this documentary that is getting these losers all riled up. They're pissing their pants because he had the audacity to acknowledge the influence of Native Americans on the U.S. government and the U.S. Constitution. So let's see what these two dipshits have to say.
But his most recent project, a 6-episode, 12-hour marathon called The American Revolution, is not, in fact, a legitimate or important historical record. It is, in many respects, a very well-produced piece of propaganda. Now, online, you may have seen some commentators.
Now, guys, note the irony here. It should be pretty obvious. Well-known anti-trans bigot propagandist Matt Walsh is upset that someone else is producing so-called propaganda.
Dismiss the production as woke for one reason or another, but it's actually far more insidious than that.
Oh.
If it was just another woke production, it'd be very easy to dismiss. As best as I can, I'm going to go in order here through some of the more objectionable moments in the series. And we'll start, of course, at the beginning, during the introduction of the very first episode. This is the moment that sets the tone and makes it clear what Burns is going to attempt to do with this documentary. Watch.
Long before 13 British colonies made themselves into the United States, the 6 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Tuscarora, Oneida, and Mohawk, had created a union of their own that they called the Haudenosaunee, a democracy that had flourished for centuries.
We heartily recommend union. We are a powerful confederacy, and by your observing the same methods our wise forefathers have taken, you will acquire fresh strength and power. Therefore, whatever befalls you, never fall out one with another.
In the spring of 1754, the celebrated scientist and writer Benjamin Franklin
Never heard of him.
proposed that the British colonies form a similar union.
So you heard that correctly. The 6 Indian tribes of the Iroquois Confederacy, according to the narrator, were a thriving democracy. And the founding fathers would go on to create a similar union. So the implication is that Ben Franklin saw what the Iroquois had achieved, and like a typical white colonialist demon, he cribbed their work for the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Our system of government is based on the appropriation of marginalized people. That's the idea.
No, it's not, Matt. No, it's not. The only thing Ken Burns is saying is that Ben Franklin took some inspiration from a Native American form of government. Nowhere in that opening clip does he say the U.S. government is based entirely on the Iroquois Confederacy, and that every single word of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was lifted straight from, Iroquois, governmental philosophy. You are creating a straw man argument that Ken Burns does not make at all in this documentary. But go ahead.
We owe our democracy to the Indians, basically.
No.
So this is the opening argument of this documentary. Now, never mind the fact that the Iroquois didn't even have a written language. Never mind the fact that they didn't hold any kind of election at all to choose their leaders. Never mind the fact that clan mothers, the Indian elders who actually selected the leaders, obtained their power because of hereditary right, meaning their bloodline. Never mind the fact that there wasn't anything like a Western democracy in any Indian tribe anywhere in the hemisphere. Despite
Again, who is he arguing against? Who is he arguing? He blew this up from Ben Franklin saw that these, separate tribes came together and created a single government. And maybe we should do that. To, oh my God, they're not exactly like Western democracies, so there's no way there could have been any influence whatsoever on the U.S. government in its formation. I mean, this guy must have a real difficult time going into a Subway, right? Because when he looks at, a chicken bacon ranch sandwich, and then he turns his head slightly to the left and looks at the menu and sees a, ham and Swiss, he's like, well, that's not a chicken bacon ranch sandwich. That can't be a sandwich because it's not the exact formation of the sandwich that I like. Yeah, dummy. A thing doesn't have to be exactly like another thing to take inspiration from it. I know that might be too difficult for your brain to understand, right? But that is a possibility. And what I find funny about this is that you could make the same argument about Greek democracy, right? You can say, oh, the Greek democracies in 400 BC had an influence on U.S. government, but they're not one-to-one, so you can't say that there's any influence. But no doubt, if you went up to Matt Walsh, at a Chuck E. Cheese, because that's probably where he hangs out, because he likes certain age of girls that he talks about a lot when it comes to fertility. But if you went up to him at a Chuck E. Cheese, next to the ball pit, and said, "Hey, Matt, the Greeks had an influence on the U.S. government," he'd be like, "Yeah, that's true, But as soon as you say that about Native Americans, he loses his fucking mind. Oh, gee, I wonder why.
Despite all this, we're supposed to conclude that because a bunch of tribes were able to band together and form a primitive confederacy, Ben Franklin was sitting there taking notes and ultimately created similar union based on theirs. Now, notably, Burns does not tell you what he's basing this claim on, which will become a running theme as we go through here, because the claim is obviously ridiculous. So,
obviously.
I'll tell you.
Okay.
I'll give you the one piece of evidence, the only piece of evidence that he's relying on to make this absurd and remarkable argument. I mean, if this was true, that our democracy was based on Indian tribes.
Not based on, influenced by, dummy.
Well, that's big news. So, extraordinary claim, extraordinary evidence, as we're told. So what's the extraordinary evidence to support this claim? Well, it's this letter, which was sent by Ben Franklin to a man named James Parker in 1751, more than 24 years before the American Revolution. And here's what the letter says. Quote, "It would be a very strange thing if 6 nations of ignorant savages should be capable of forming a scheme for such a union and be able to execute it in such a manner as that it has subsisted ages and appears indissoluble, and yet that a like union should be impracticable for 10 or a dozen English colonies to whom it is more necessary and must be more advantageous, and who cannot be supposed to want an equal understanding of their interests."
Ooh, nice ad break.
If you can't... Okay, so Franklin is not talking about war with Britain or establishing an independent nation or anything like that. Remember, this is decades before the American Revolution. And Franklin certainly isn't praising any thriving democracy in the Iroquois Confederacy, because there is not one.
Yeah, there is.
Instead, he's talking about a straightforward plan to unite the colonies so that they function more like a political unit rather than 13 completely separate entities. And he's saying, if these savages can form a confederacy to function as a unit, then obviously we can too. So it's a bit like coming across a pack of dogs on the street and seeing how they're all very quiet and well-behaved. And
Native Americans are dogs. Cool.
Then you turn to your children and say, well, if those dogs can behave, then you can too. And when you say that, you're not telling your children that the dogs invented the concept of good behavior or made you realize what good behavior looks like. You're not modeling your parenting off of the dogs. You're not saying that your kids should model their entire lives after the dogs. You're saying that if extremely primitive creatures can do something right,
wow,
then we, as much more advanced creatures, have no excuse for failing in that regard. That's what he's saying.
That's what he's saying. Oh, leave it to Matt Walsh to understand that letter in the most racist way possible. What is more likely, what Ben Franklin meant was that, look, you assholes think that Native Americans are so primitive. I don't, but y'all do, okay? And y'all can't figure out how to band together, but they can do it. So if you think they're so stupid, why can't you do it? That's basically the gist of it. But of course, Matt Walsh, doing a little bit of a projection, he's bursting at the seams with bigotry and stupidity. But that's what Ben Franklin meant.
As Rich Lowry writes in the New York Post, there are other major problems with the logic here as well. Quote, the Iroquois have no role in our constitutional history. The scholar Robert Nadelson has noted the Iroquois don't show up as a model in the 34-volume Journals of the Continental Congress, the 3-volume collection, The Records of the Federal Convention, in other words, the Constitutional Convention, or the more than 40-volume documentary history of the ratification of the Constitution. In other words, Burns deliberately left the viewer with the impression that the Indians, despite being illiterate savages, by Ben Franklin's own testimony, had somehow
by your interpretation of it, yeah,
influenced Ben Franklin and the Founding Fathers and laid the groundwork for our system of government. In reality, the Iroquois had created a loose confederacy, which was vaguely similar to many other similar confederacies throughout history.
Okay, so Matt Walsh is making it seem like it's so absurd to claim that, the U.S. government was mildly influenced by, the Iroquois Confederacy. There's basically zero evidence except for this one little letter from Benjamin Franklin. Well, it's weird because in 1988, the U.S. government, the Congress, acknowledged the contributions made by the Iroquois Confederacy and other Indian nations to the formation and development of the United States. Oh, wow, look at that. Really? And if you think, oh, that's because the Congress was, all Democrats or whatever, it was basically close to a 50-50 split. And look at that. 408 to 8. So it wasn't really like just a bunch of woke Marxists, saying that, oh, we have to acknowledge, the Native Americans' influence on our government because we were mean to them and genocided them a little bit. It's just a fact. Okay, but let's look a little bit further. It says here, Ben Franklin repeatedly drew on the wisdom and democratic principles of the Iroquois Confederacy and its constitution as he struggled to unite the 13 sparring colonies, which Matt was talking about. Not only did he write a letter to his friend, he actually invited representatives of the Iroquois nations to help promote 3 core concepts of their constitution: peace, equity, and justice, as foundational precepts for unifying the colonies. Okay, a little bit more than just writing a meanly worded letter to his friend. Yeah, okay. And of course, Benjamin Franklin was not the only founding father to acknowledge the influence of Native Americans. It says here, John Adams suggested that those drafting the Constitution should study the governments of the ancient Germans and, oh, look at that, modern Indians. Wow, crazy. Which he believed divided power among the 3 branches of executive, judicial, and legislative governance. In particular, he cited the Mohawks, who he argued enjoyed complete individual independence, while tribal leaders brought major decisions like declarations of war to a national assembly. Wow, that's basically zero influence at all. Even John Adams, who I believe was one of our presidents. According to the Marxist website history.com, it says here, when the delegates to the Constitutional Convention met in 1787 to debate the form of government the United States should have, there were no contemporary democracies in Europe from which they could draw inspiration. Oh, wow. Wow, interesting. Okay. The most democratic forms of government that any of the convention members had personally encountered were those of Native American nations. Oh. Of particular interest was the Iroquois Confederacy, which historians have argued wielded a significant influence on the U.S. Constitution. Descriptions of them appear in the 3-volume handbook by John Adams, which I mentioned earlier. It included a bunch of European assholes like John Locke and Montesquieu. John Locke, by the way, justified owning people, otherwise known as slavery. But it also included the Iroquois Confederacy and other indigenous governments, which many of the delegates knew through personal experience. But according to Matt, there was zero influence whatsoever. The Iroquois Confederacy was in no way an exact model for the U.S. Constitution, which, again, nobody was arguing. Matt made this up in his head. However, it provided something that Locke and Montesquieu couldn't, a real-life example of some of the political concepts the framers were interested in adopting in the U.S. So this idea that the Native American, forms of government had no influence or basically no influence is completely full of shit. A lot of the founding fathers had intimate knowledge of Native American government structures and obviously were influenced by that. But for some reason that triggers Matt. For you to know basic ass history is something that deeply upsets Matt because it acknowledges that not only white people can bring value to human society, okay? We can also learn stuff from those icky red and brown people. All right, let's see what our favorite receding hairline, Stephen Crowdois, has to say about Native Americans and how gross and dumb they are.
The first claim that's made here. Check the references. It's always so paper thin. The idea that whites undervalued how well the Native American Indian tribes took care of the American continent before our arrival.
We know our lands are now become more valuable. The white people think we do not know their value. But we are sensible that the land is everlasting.
Yeah, here's the truth. You weren't sensible. The land wasn't so everlasting until we got here. The natives hunted many species into local extinction, like the buffalo, like...
Oh, he's still doing the Pavlov bell thing because he thinks his audience are morons and dogs.
The beaver, megafauna like the woolly mammoth, by the way, ancestors of native tribes. They didn't even use every part of the animal. And by the way...
Okay. So he goes through a few things there. The Native Americans hunted the bison to extinction, and beavers and woolly mammoths, I guess. Let's just go back real quick. The woolly mammoth thing is kind of funny. It says 13 to 12,000 years ago. The science actually says that hunting was an element of the extinction of woolly mammoths, but it was also, environmental changes because, they were alive during the Ice Age or whatever, that type of shit. All right. So it was a combination of factors. It wasn't just hunting. Okay. But not only that, animals on other parts of the world, in Europe, in fact, were hunted / climate changed out of existence. Okay? But I want to hone in on this specific claim that the Native Americans hunted the buffalo to extinction. He must think his audience is really stupid and is not going to fact check that at all, or any of his claims, but specifically that one, because that one's pretty fucking dumb, okay? Now, this is according to Marxist-Leninist South Dakota State University, all right? And they say, during the Civil War, the U.S. government desired to contain Native Americans to reservations. It was known how important these creatures, meaning buffalo, were to the livelihood of indigenous peoples. The tactic of scorched earth policy was implemented, giving military commanders license to destroy as many buffalo as possible. He didn't mention that. That's weird. Because it seems like it's the exact opposite of what he's saying. Murdering the buffalo created a huge lack in the Native Americans' food source, which caused them to need government support. This guy who's all about, not relying on the government, fails to mention that the government deliberately killed all of these buffalo so that all these native people would have to grovel to and rely on the government. Huh, weird. The sacred creatures once roamed the Great Plains were no longer seen in the 50-year period of the eradication of buffalo. Over 40 million had been killed. Generals William T. Sherman and Philip Sheridan, those don't sound like Native American names to me, sent soldiers to the plains with U.S. cavalry guns to kill buffalo. The soldiers would use buffalo as target practice, killing them in massive numbers daily and then leaving them there to rot. Wow. They only took buffalo tongues and their meat of choice. Military commanders had licenses to kill as many buffalo as possible because it was believed they were doing their part to gain control of Native Americans. Seems like crucial context Steven Crowder is excluding from his report, his deeply researched report on this Ken Burns documentary. So he mentioned beavers too. Okay. Well, it's a similar story there too. Wow, look at that. There seems to be a pattern here. It's not the Native Americans driving these animals to extinction. It's white European dudes. It says here that when Europeans colonized North America, the quest for beaver pelts lured frontiersmen and entrepreneurs first to the eastern regions and then westward into the U.S. and Canada. Because of intensive unregulated trapping and hunting, beavers had become rare or had completely vanished in much of North America by 1850. Luckily, beaver hats went out of fashion and their populations recovered. But again, that was not because of Native Americans, dummy. It was the white Europeans who had to fucking have a nice little hat to wear because it was in vogue or whatever. So all of his points there are completely wrong. Shocker, I know, guys. I hate to tell you that Steven Crowder is wrong and is either deliberately lying or is too dumb to realize that everything he says is completely bullshit.
They didn't even use every part of the animal.
Okay, and that was the other point he made too. They don't even use all the parts of the animal. For some animals, that's true. That's true. But when it came to buffalo, they absolutely used every part of the animal. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? You're just flat out wrong. You are aggressively stupid. If you're a Steven Crowder fan and you believe that, then you need to get an MRI because I worry about you. This is according to the Hoover Institute, where that decrepit old loser Thomas Sowell lives at. He literally lives at the Hoover Institution. But according to them, it says here, it is true that Plains Indians used every part of the buffalo.
And by the way,
I thought they did. That was the whole racket.
No, they would hunt buffalo. They would scare an entire herd of buffalo off a cliff. And if anyone spoke out against it, like, hey, we don't have modern refrigeration methods, so why don't we only kill the one buffalo that we...
This is really funny, by the way. I do not understand how Steven Crowder did not become a professional comedian. When you're so funny that you have to wrangle your dad into your studio to force laugh at everything you say, I don't understand how you didn't make it in comedy.
We can only semi-harvest. Like, that's enough out of you, squatting bear. There's something to be said for tradition. And I say this local extinction because...
So his point is that, the Native Americans drove buffalo off a cliff. They did do that. That is true. That is true. But that in no way contradicts the idea that they used every part of the buffalo, which they still did. Guys, you can look this up. I'm not going to do all the work for you, okay? You can still harvest every part of a buffalo, even if you kill multiple at a time, because it's more efficient to do that, right? It's actually kind of smart. But he's going to spin it in this, they're wastefully killing, a million buffalo at one time, and they can't possibly process all of that stuff. When literally the European colonizers were murdering en masse bison and just picking some pieces off of it and leaving the rest to rot. He didn't bring that up. I don't know why. I don't know why he would do that. Clearly, Matt Walsh and Stefan Crowdois are a couple of morons who clearly just don't like Native Americans. They lament the fact that we didn't get rid of all of them, but the facts show that Native Americans absolutely had an influence on the formation of our government. Doesn't mean that there was a one-to-one, copy of the Iroquois Confederacy. Nobody was arguing that. That's a straw man. But if you look at the evidence, absolutely they had an impact on our government. And Steven Crowder is just absolutely wrong about everything he brings up in the beginning of his video. The idea that the Native Americans were hunting to extinction all of these animals when it turns out it was actually the white European colonizers. Wow, look at that. Oops. Made a big mistake. It turns out that it's the exact opposite of what I'm saying. But of course, these these dipsticks, these morons, are going to lie. They're gonna, assume that their audiences, have a double-digit IQ and don't know how to like pull up their own pants. Because it's easier. It's easier to just lie and tell your audience what they want to hear, because then they give you money. And when it comes down to it, isn't that what really matters? It's not the truth. It's not facts. It's the money. The sweet, sweet money. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoy this one. Love you. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.